This episode is brought to you by Volvo Penta. With over a century of pushing boundaries in the marine industry, Volvo Penta delivers reliable and sustainable solutions for boaters and marine professionals worldwide. From their industry-leading IPS system, offering superior maneuverability and fuel efficiency, to their innovative D4 and D6 marine engines, Volvo Penta has you covered. Experience enhanced features like joystick driving for precise control and the fully integrated glass cockpit display for a seamless navigation experience. Whether you're navigating calm waters or challenging the high seas, trust Volvo Penta to provide the performance and reliability you expect. Visit volvopenta.com to learn more about their revolutionary products and services. On June 6, 1998, a 23-year-old Matthew Lewis was working in the frigid South Atlantic off South Georgia Island as a scientific observer aboard the 144-foot Sudur Havid, a commercial longliner whose quarry was Patagonian toothfish, better known on your dinner plate as Chilean sea bass, but also dubbed white gold for its high market value. It's been said that it is among the most black-marketed seafoods on Earth, and being found primarily in Antarctic waters, it's also among the most dangerous to pursue. As the vessel encounters a storm, its fish processing facilities become backed up. Bilge pumps clog, the boat floods, and pretty soon it's time to abandon ship. But when the captain, the person we all know as the one designated to leave their post last, bails first, chaos ensues, and Lewis, the least experienced mariner aboard, ends up leading the rescue. It's a harrowing account and one you might almost not believe unless maybe you have worked in commercial fishing yourself. The UK's Sunday Times called his book, Last Man Off, a sinister version of The Perfect Storm. It was 8 years after the sinking of the Sudur Havid before Lewis sat down to write the book and, he hoped, process some of the lingering grief. What came to be was a horrifically descriptive recounting of the voyage and tragedy and the nitty-gritty of how rough, tumble, disorganized, and downright dangerous commercial fishing can be. Mr. Matthew Lewis, I want to welcome you to the Power and Motoryacht podcast and thank you for generously offering your time to share your experience with us. It must have been terrifying being new to that world and finding yourself working the South Atlantic and Antarctic, being on that aging vessel in the furious 50s with a motley crew, and then, of course, the sinking. But this is your story to tell. Can you give us a rundown of the final voyage of the Sudur Havid?
Yeah, it's been a while since the boat sank, but a lot of the memories are still very, very clear in my head. So I'm hoping I can give you a good picture of what it was like on that day.
Can only imagine. So you signed up for this as a young, you were 23. This was your first job out of school?
Yeah, so young and naive. I just finished university and I was looking for that first job out of university just to get your feet on feet under the desk and to start making career progression. And I'd heard from a friend about this work as a scientific observer on fishing boats. So you'd fly out to somewhere, some remote corner of the world, live on a fishing boat for a few months and write a report about what was happening. And so I sent in my CV and applied for this job. And the next thing I knew, I was flying out to South Africa to join a fishing boat in Cape Town. And then that boat, the Sudur Havid, then sailed down towards Antarctica. So we were going to be fishing off the island of South Georgia. So in terms of when you're picturing it, if you go right to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, right down to the southern Atlantic Ocean, almost to Antarctica. So we were 54 degrees south, a long way down. And we're going to be fishing offshore there. Yeah. Past the roaring 40s and into the furious 50s, as they describe it. And we were going to be fishing for a fish called toothfish, which you won't find for sale. It's sold as Chilean sea bass. So some of your readers and listeners may have come across it in good restaurants, as Chilean sea bass is quite popular because it takes the flavors well when it's being cooked in restaurant. And it's not the best looking fish I've ever seen. But we were going to be catching that off the island of South Georgia. I mean, the island is huge. It's 120 miles long. And you're thousands of miles from the nearest civilization. So remote corner of the world, deep water. And we're hauling up these fish that are, some of them are 6 feet long, maybe weighed, well over 200 pounds. And, they could be sort of 60 years old. So enormous fish. Sudur Havid was not the newest boat that you'd ever seen. So when I arrived in Cape Town, I was more than a bit taken aback. There was this rusting old. She'd been a trawler once, and then she'd been converted to be a longliner, and I think she was well over 30 years old when I saw her. But there was rust streaks down her hull, and she was sitting sort of low in the water in Cape Town. I wondered what I was letting myself in for.
I can only imagine. And how was your reception there at the boat on the dock?
I have to say that, given that I was going to be there living with them and watching what they were doing and reporting back, is that the crew were brilliantly, welcoming, quite receptive. Like, not straight away. So when I walked onto the boat, and I got the tour from the guy who's going to be sort of looking after me, and he gave me the tour, and I saw some of the like the skipper and the fisher master. They didn't look very friendly, but actually, when I was on board, they did make me welcome. And I'm not, if you're going to have somebody living on board and watching what you're doing, I'm not sure everybody would get that reception, but they were really good with me. And I was going to be sharing a cabin with an engineer called Glenn. The boat itself was tiny inside, so you were bouncing off the walls when you walked along the corridors, and the bridge itself was very small. The boat was run by these two big South African guys. One was called Bubbles; he was the skipper, and then his friend Butty was the fishing master. And they introduced themselves. They were in charge of the boat. Unusually, a couple of days later, we were then joined by this guy Björgvin from Iceland, who'd been flown in, and I was told that he was there just for his certificate. He was going to be taking us out because we were going out on the high seas, that they needed him there to have him there for paperwork. But it would be Bubbles and Butty who were in charge. And sure enough, Björgvin was basically on night watch for the whole of the time we were at sea.
What was your boating experience prior to this?
I'd done a bit of diving, bit of scuba diving. I'd done a little bit of sailing on yachts, and I'd done one research trip on a trawler, so a scientific trawler out of Scotland. I'd volunteered and gone and helped on it, and that given me a good idea of what it was like to be on a big boat. I mean, that boat had gone north up towards Iceland to the Faroe Shetland Channel, and we've been researching in quite deep water, so it gave me a good idea of what it was like to be on a boat that was when it was out at sea and rough. But the Scotia, the one I was on, was quite old. But, on that boat, we'd done emergency drills and muster stations. I knew where my life jacket was. I'd tried on a survival suit. When I got onto the Sudur Havid, none of that. So I got onto this 44-metre fishing boat, a couple of 100 tons, went to my shared cabin, saw some posters on the wall telling me how to get into a life raft. But at no point did we do anything like a drill. And at no point the life jackets I found out were in a locked cupboard to stop them from being stolen when the crew were in port. And I didn't have a survival suit. Nobody had been issued with one. I did have a deck suit, which was like a waterproof suit that if you were not entirely waterproof, but like a weatherproof one. But if you were knocked over the side of the boat, it had a little bit of buoyant insulation in it that would keep you on the surface and give you sort of double your survival chances, but not a sealed dry suit that you're familiar with.
And I think I recall reading a lot of these members of the crew didn't even know how to swim, which is very common in the fishing industry, actually.
Yeah, there was 38 of us on board, complete mixture of people. We had a German engineer, Icelandic captain that I mentioned, a couple of Portuguese deck bosses who were basically in charge of the crew and they're out on deck, and then a mixture of South African people from different backgrounds, but also some Namibian guys who basically a lot of the crew were Namibian from when the boat had been working out of a place called Wildfish Bay. So they'd ended up staying on board. And some of those guys, in fact, I think a lot of those guys couldn't swim. Quite a normal thing, you're right.
Well, in olden times, they didn't even bother learning to swim. I think I read in some book somewhere that, or maybe several times, that it just prolonged your suffering and death, right?
Yeah. I'd had the same conversation. One of my friends from my marine biology studies had been a fisherman in Cornwall before he joined us, and he said that a lot of the Cornish fishermen, their theory was better not to learn to swim, because then if you get knocked over the side, you're just going to drown. You don't have that moment of being left behind. So It's not the way I work. I want to try and give
Well,
myself the best survival chances, but
and you're still here.
yeah.
So okay, so you head out for South Georgia Island. You're on the boat. How long?
Oh, it took us almost 3 weeks to actually sail from Cape Town down to South Georgia. That included turning back into Cape Town after a couple of days to replace some pumps, and that was
Oh,
quite
that's right.
important later on
Yeah.
because those pumps were then went on to cause us trouble. But basically, these pumps that pumped out the factory. So the Sudur Havid was a big enough boat to have a factory on board where the crew would then process and fillet and freeze the fish. But on that boat, the scuppers had been welded shut, and some hatches had been cut into the side of the boat. That meant that if the fish was coming into the boat, these doors needed to be open. But because the doors were open and the scuppers had been welded shut, the boat then relied on these pumps to pump the water out of the factory, which was basically on only just above sea level.
Mm.
So I didn't appreciate how unusual that was at the time, but the boat was relying on these pumps. And a couple of days out of Cape Town, they realised these pumps had burnt out due to a faulty float switch. So they put back in and replaced the pumps with pumps that the skipper Bubbles was not happy with. They were not as substantial as the pumps he'd had before, but they were all that was available. So we were back out at sea. And 3 weeks later, heading into the Antarctic winter, we arrived off South Georgia, picked up our license, and we were off fishing. So go long line in for these toothfish. So toothfish are basically big predators that operate near the bottom of the ocean. So we were going to be putting out long lines, but set on the bottom of the ocean. So big weighted long lines, like 14,000 hooks set every night and then retrieve the next day. So 14,000 hooks, each baited with a sardine, and then retrieve the next day.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
How long? I remember reading in the book because I have a background, very brief background in commercial fishing, and I remember agonizing over the hours and the obvious exhaustion that these guys went through, but also you. How long would it take to set a line and then retrieve one?
So setting the line at night, because then if you do it in the darkness, it doesn't attract albatross, which is one of the reasons I was there, was to make sure that albatross weren't being caught.
Right.
So if they set the line at night, it would take like an hour and a half to set the line off the back of the boat. And then that line would soak overnight, the crew would sleep, and then they would start hauling the line at first light just before. And it would take most of the day to get the line in. And then when they'd finished hauling the line, or while they were hauling the line, other crew called pot makers would be making the line back up, ready to fire that away that night, shoot away that night. So basically, it was a continuous process. At the time that we were fishing, I was told that they were actually being quite nice to the crew. So some boats, if they're really busy fishing, they'll have two lines in the water, so the crew will be fishing round the clock, just hauling and shooting all the time. But because the fishing, they were still exploring where we were going. They were being nice to the crew. So basically, they got to sleep at night. Luxury. And we had. Oh, sorry. I was going to say we had 14,000 hooks in the water, but the fishing wasn't going brilliantly. They were catching a couple of tons of fish a day, but they weren't very pleased with the catches.
And what were your quarters like?
Yeah, my cabin was basic, but okay. So Glenn had the top bunk. I had the bottom bunk, had a drawer each. It was just old varnished wood. It was very basic. You know, the Sudur Havid had not been updated in almost 40 years. She'd been at sea. I said over 30 years, but I think she was nearly 40 years old. And she'd not been updated, and it was a sort of basic accommodation. Most of the time, we didn't have heating inside, just the heat of the engines. But that meant that if I was in the officer's mess, which was not very grand, it was just a table in a plywood room, then you could see your breath when you're eating your food, because outside it would be near zero or below zero. So in American terms, like sort of, probably in the 20s or 30s Fahrenheit. And you could see your food, see your breath when you're eating your food, and you ate it very quickly. But so not deluxe accommodation, barely any heating, one shower a week if I was lucky. The crew didn't get a shower at all for the time we were away. But they had a sneaky way of, if they saw that one of us was going for a shower, they knew the hot water was going to be on, they'd race down to the crew's bathroom area and try and get a bucket of water to have a wash in.
Wow,
but
poor guys.
I didn't know they were not even allowed hot water until much later.
Oof. Hot water at sea is a real luxury.
Yeah, yeah.
So, any seasickness? I mean, I can't quite remember from the book, but how did you feel adjusting to this?
Yeah, I'm quite lucky. I get like nauseous the first couple of days I'm at sea. Just my appetite goes a bit, so I make myself eat food, and then I'm fine.
Yeah.
So within a short time of going out from the boat, from the port, I was just fine. And in fact, quite a lot of photos of me when I'm diving have got me stuffing my face with food because I'm trying to, make sure I don't get seasick. But I'm all right with that. There's some awesome hangovers because of drinking with the crew, but other than that, no seasickness whatsoever once we were away. But you're talking like every day getting, when we were fishing, very rough conditions. I think you can appreciate it's a remote part of the world. There's no land to stop the swells, so
Sure.
famously the swells go round and round the Southern Ocean and build up. And they're very long, lazy swells, so they're not necessarily big, breaking, steep. But my friends did try explain to me, about watching the wind chop coming through and the big ocean swells moving in a different direction. But each day we'd be out there and struggling to stay upright while you're trying to work.
Sure. And you were I don't remember this from the book, but you were drinking on the boat while it was underway?
Yeah, not
Oh.
well. I was going to say not while we were working, but it was quite normal for the steward would take some of the guys out on deck an Irish coffee in the morning, like a coffee with whiskey in it, just to make sure that they kept warm all day.
Wow.
It was, I would say, they were generally pretty good. There was only drinking after we'd finished working, and it was only on special occasions. Like we did, I think the closest I saw us come to a mutiny was when the skipper realised we'd run out of brandy.
Oh, God.
But it was a South African boat, and we had some very good fun evenings playing cards and chatting after we'd shot the line away, or if there was a break in the fishing. And in particular, there was a break at the end of May. We'd been fishing for a few weeks. We'd sort of half filled the hold, and we needed to go and refuel. So there was a period just at the end of May we'd been fishing, and we took a break, went up to the Falkland Islands to refuel from a reefer from a tanker just that was operating outside of the Falklands waters, and we refilled the Sudur Havid with diesel, basically because they could get a cheaper price if both the Sudur Havid and a sister ship refueled at the same time, and that meant that we didn't take the fish off the boat, so we had a hold,
right,
filling up with fish, sort of 2/3 by the time a week later, basically a hold full of tons and tons of fish, but also diesel, and 38 of us on board. That's the situation that we were in, basically at the start of June. So I woke up one morning to see the roughest conditions that we'd had so far that voyage, and I looked out on deck, sort of stuck my head out through the door to see what I needed to wear, stuck my head out to see my crewmates being thrown around on the deck and struggling to stay on their feet. And I got kitted up in lots of layers. I mean, you're talking about multiple layers of thermals, then clothes, then a padded freezer suit, and then this waterproof deck suit that I had. Lots of bobble hats and gloves, and as many pairs of socks as you could fit in your wellies as possible. I went out on the boat, on the deck, and it was like working like in a rodeo. The boat was rolling and pitching so much, going from side to side, and every now and then the bow would hit the bottom of a trough in between waves, and then the bow would just disappear into the trough, and a few seconds later a big wall of green water would come rolling down the deck or moving down the deck and just hit us as we were trying to work on deck, try and knock you off your feet. And then at the top of the next swell there'd be this big pause before the boat tipped over the top of the crest of the swells and down the next one. So all of this is, you're looking at a day of work out on this with the boat rolling and pitching and getting absolutely soaked out on deck.
Yeah. And so this is when things turn.
Yeah, I think, but importantly at that point, I didn't realize how the things were going to turn. I mean, when I was looking around the deck, people were still working in this. I was still able to get my job done. I was quite proud of myself because instead of like wussing out and disappearing into my cabin and saying, "Oh, it's too rough, I can't work," I was trying to keep up with the fishermen. So I was out on deck. I was taking my observations. I was doing my work. If they were working, I was going to work, and so I was out on the deck doing that. And I'd worked out this ridiculous way of having my arm up inside a carrier bag, up inside a polythene bag, to write on my piece of paper so I could make my notes. And looking around, people were working, people were laughing, everybody was getting soaked, but at the same time, we were able to work. And it seemed crazy, but we were bringing in fish, and actually they were catching quite well that day. And so I did my 2 hours out on deck. I mean, in terms of giving your listeners an idea of how big these swells are, is at 10 o'clock in the morning, the swells were big enough that they were casting shadows over the deck. So they were blocking out the sun at 10 o'clock in the morning. So they're enormous. You're talking about sort of 10 meters, maybe more. Anyway, I disappeared back inside, having done my deck observations, and I was due to be down in the factory that afternoon. And when I went down into the factory, then there was water just running backwards and forwards across the deck, and it was tread plate, so metal diamond plate. And when I went down, it was making quite a nice sound. It was just a tinkling sound, sort of water cascading backwards and forwards. And one of the crewmen said, "Oh, you're going to get wet today." And I thought it was all very funny. I was wearing my oilskins. But within a short time, while I was working in the middle of the factory, the water had built up enough that it went over my boot. And that sounds really daft because up until then, I'd been dry inside my layers. But at that point, the water had built up enough that it just tipped over. And that water was ice cold. I'd been told by Klaus, the engineer, that morning that the water going into the intake on the engine was -1. So -1 degrees centigrade. So what's that, 30 Fahrenheit? And like just above the freezing point of seawater. And so freezing cold water. And I just, for a laugh, I said, that's it, I can't work anymore. I've got a wet foot. So I wanted to wait and see, because they'd been trying to fix these pumps. So the pumps that had been playing up had been blocking with fish guts and scales and cardboard and things like that swirling around the factory. And so the crew had been trying to get these pumps fixed, and Melvin, the electrician, had been trying to fix up an electric standby pump just to get the factory clear of water. And I thought, right, I'll wait until they've done that, and then I'll carry on working. So I sat up on the hatch in the middle of the factory and watched, and everybody still seemed to be laughing. Shaquem, one of the deck bosses, was taking a video to show his family the crazy conditions he had to work in. And I thought, if they're relaxed, I should be too. But the water carried on building, and the pumps weren't getting fixed. And then people were asking, so they were going up to the bridge to see the captain and to try and get them to stop, but nobody was coming down to help us. So despite us asking, there were no engineers in the factory. It was just Melvin, the electrician, but nobody would come in to help us. We had a big diesel standby pump on the wall, and nobody would come into the factory because it was wet, but they wouldn't come in. And nobody from the bridge had been down to see what was happening. And we'd been up, some different crew members had been up to see the bridge and said, the problems we were having. But we couldn't get an engineer or skipper or fishing master down. And eventually I said to the crew, one of them said, well, you go up. They'll listen to you. So I went up to the bridge. And this is a grand total of 2 flights of stairs, so it's not very far. Went up to the bridge. And I walked into it and I said, guys, we've got some problems with some water down on the factory. And they said, yes, Matt, we know, shut the door on your way out. And that was it. That was the grand total of, these guys who I'd been talking to and having laughs with every day for 2 months. And then the next minute you're just being pushed out the door because they didn't want to listen to you. And I think, thinking back on it, I think they'd been having an argument with each other, a row about it. And I walked in at the wrong moment. I think that maybe one of them had wanted to stop fishing and the other one had wanted to carry on. But either way, they didn't come down. Wow. And eventually I went back down to the factory, and one of my, we managed to get one engineer into the factory who then couldn't get the diesel pump started, so he disappeared out of it again. And eventually I got my cabin mate into the factory to try and clear the pumps, and he showed me what to do to try and clear the grates on the bottom, the grills that kept, basically kept the pumps from blocking. He showed me how to reach underneath to clear it out. I thought I was going to be putting my fingers into an impeller or something, but he showed me that it was a safe place to reach. And so I reached underneath, and we were trying to get these pumps to work again, and the water had still been building up. So you're talking about a big cascade of water going backwards and forwards in the factory now, like, several feet deep. And at one point, all of a sudden, the water in the well, the pump that I was working on, suddenly started to go down. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant. I've got it working. I've got this pump working. The water's going down. And then I looked across the factory and thought, the boat had stopped rolling, and now she was just listing to one side. Like, I'd mended the pump, but it was too late. The boat was had just gone over to starboard, and she was then just hanging on that side. So
your heart must have sunk then. I mean,
yeah. Yes. It's one of those moments when you realise, like, it's too little, too late. And
did the crew seem to have the same sort of sobering realization, or, I mean, I think must have.
What I hadn't quite clicked was, at that point, most of the crew had left the factory. There were a few of us left down there. Oh. So maybe 5 or 6 crew, including me, trying to save the boat. Most of the others had sensibly left. This is an enclosed space. The only door out was on the lower side, and there was one door outside into the ocean, one door into the accommodation. So when the boat rolled, listed over, I just decided that it was time to get out of the factory. Somebody started throwing life jackets into the factory, but there weren't enough for me or Glenn. So we left the factory then and went up into the accommodation, up to where my cabin was, found a life jacket, and then somebody had knocked the padlock off with an axe. So the cupboard was open. I found the padlock, the life jacket, and then I found everybody else all lined up on the deck, ready to go, ready to abandon ship, life jackets on, oilskins on. And I said to my friend Trevor, "Is this it? Are we abandoning or what?" Yeah, Matt, we're going. And that was so. No call, no siren, no announcement to say abandon ship. That was it.
They just started. Yeah. No direction. And this was at what time in the night?
So this is probably 3:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So still light, it's Antarctic winter. But I mean, I'd gone down to the factory at 2:00 in the afternoon. Before 3:00, I'd finished working, and by 3:30, we were out of the factory and preparing to abandon. I'd never launched a life raft before, much to my embarrassment. Now, I hadn't done basic sea survival training, so I had no idea. I'd only seen it on films, and so I grabbed my waterproof suit from the chimney. Nearly got stuck in the chimney, and I went out, and the Shaquem, the Portuguese deck boss, was there, and I thought, right, he's going to know what he's doing. He's been at sea for a long time, so we went to launch the life raft, and he basically released the straps that are holding it on, and we got ready and pushed the first life raft over the edge of the boat, and it hit the water. The fiberglass canister cracked open, and nothing happened. So there's just this big white capsule floating on the water with no inflation, nothing. So the crew pulled on the painter, but still, like, on the rope that was attached to it, and still nothing happened, and it was just left floating there. So we launched the next one, and that one landed on the deck in amongst the crew, and they bundled it over the side, and that one inflated. So we had one life raft, and then we raced around to the other side of the boat, the lower side, and launched the 2 starboard rafts. They both inflated, so we had three life rafts ready. It should have been enough for 38 of us. I have to say, at that moment, I had a moment of pause where I can remember going down the steps, and for once I was on my own as I went down the steps from launching those life rafts. And these steps, metal staircases at a crazy angle, and I just looked out at the ocean, and it was grey and being ripped apart by the wind. So there were snow showers being blown through. The swells were having the tops ripped off by the wind, so it's streaked swells. And I just looked at it, couldn't see anything other than just raging, swells. And I thought, oh, maybe this is it. Maybe we're not going to make this. And I just decided that I was going to do my best to get the crew off and see if we could do our best to survive, see what happened. But, couldn't. There was no point in giving up. But we were about to abandon ship, and I didn't know what was going to happen. So let's just do the best job we could, get the crew off calmly. And I'd been warned that they would fight with knives for a place on the raft, but none of that happened. I got down to the crew to find that, I saw Shaquem and Carlos, these two Portuguese guys, in a raft already. And I thought, oh, when I abandon, I'm going in that raft. So I turned my attention, because they were going to know what they're doing. And I turned my attention to the crew, and everybody was lined up. And Charlie, one of the other deck guys, and I went along the crew, and we're just checking to see that everybody was okay. Life jackets tied, everything's ready.
I have to stop you and ask, I mean, how did your instinct kick in to frankly take on the captain's role here? I mean, like, you're talking about coming down a gangway and you're thinking of getting the crew off. That's your thought in this moment as you're looking at these raging seas and nothing else.
Yeah, because nobody was stepping up. There was nobody giving any commands. Like, these guys were looking at us for direction, and nobody from the bridge was giving any orders. So there'd been no order to abandon ship. Nobody was yelling.
But the captain's already off, right? I mean,
no, the captain was still on the bridge.
Oh,
in fact, like the skipper and the fisher master were still on the bridge, and I'd seen them packing grab bags. So I thought, right, they're doing stuff. I assumed they were sending out a mayday call. Maybe they were getting the EPIRBs, like the radio beacons, getting those ready. Maydays, things like that. All these important things. So I assumed they had important things to be doing, and it turned out later on they hadn't done all of that. So when nobody was giving any orders to the crew, then I tried to step in and just do that to keep them calm. So I'd done like life-saving training when I was a kid at school, and you're told to yell out, keep calm, everything will be fine, just move like this, and to give clear direction. So I just started doing that, and everybody calmly to the back of the boat. And then I looked up and I saw a life raft drifting away from the boat with Shaquem and Carlos in it.
Just the two of them.
Just the two of them.
Right.
I was just disgusted. And I hope that they were trying to get somebody in the water. Maybe there was somebody I couldn't see. Maybe there was some reason they'd cut away from the boat with just two of them in the life raft. But that was what I saw. And then that left us with two life rafts, 36 crew. And but to the crew's credit is then when we yelled at them to start boarding the life rafts, they did, and they did it themselves in order, with like just keeping things calm, and they gradually got everybody into the life rafts. So there was a point when we got everybody into the life rafts, and I turned around and I looked along the boat, and I was like thinking, this is the last time, I'm looking at a doomed ship here. It's the last time I'm going to see it. So I had this, I don't know, just a weird feeling. I didn't want, to think that somebody had been left behind. So I walked back up towards the bridge, climbed over the ropes, and there, next to the accommodation, is the Icelandic captain. He'd only just woken up.
Wow.
And he'd staggered out of his bunk. Somebody had woken him up and said, we're boarding, and he'd come out of his bunk with his deck suit half on, his life jacket just like loosely over his shoulder, and walked out. What's happening, Matt? We're abandoning. We're going, right now. So the poor guy had walked into that, and they'd left him asleep. So the most experienced man on board had been asleep in his bunk because he'd been off shift. They hadn't woken him up to tell him that we were abandoning ship.
And that's kind of incredible too, because anyone who's spent any deal of time at sea, especially on a particular boat, you guys have been on it for weeks now, you feel that shift. I mean, you feel if a boat's listing, that wakes you up. So that's really interesting that, maybe he was that tired or whatever, but he clearly didn't notice how dire the situation was immediately.
Yeah. But he was there and he was ready. I went back to the back of the ship ready to abandon again, and he hadn't followed me. So I turned around and I was yelling at him, come on, what are you doing? And he was struggling with something. And when I went back to him, he'd found Bubbles, the South African skipper, collapsed in the water at the bottom of the starboard side of the ship at the rail. And, he said, something's wrong. And I think maybe Bubbles had a heart attack or something. He wasn't right. And he turned very grey, and I got Bjorgvin to give him his life jacket, because mine was already tied on. And Bjorgvin went to the back of the boat, and I helped Bubbles along the alleyway to the back of the boat. Bjorgvin jumped into a raft. I helped Bubbles over the rail and had him held in between my feet as I waited. And then one of the life rafts came close, and the swell dropped away again. And then his life raft came back, and his crew were waiting with their arms stretched out, and I dropped Bubbles into their arms and then waited for the next one, and then I jumped myself. So I was the last man off the Sudur Havid, and I jumped off into the life raft, exhilarated. I think I might have screamed, just the joy of being off, thinking we were out of trouble. So naive.
Well, in a sense, you were. I mean, you didn't know then, but you better off in that raft at that point, clearly. Now, how long did it take? Did you have a painter attached, or at that point there was still a painter on?
Yeah, so the boat was still attached to us at that point by the painter, and then we, given that we could never, fishing boats are never short of knives, but moments before they'd been holding up a knife, and I'd warned them to put it away so they didn't stab Bubbles when I dropped him. And the next minute we couldn't find any knives to cut the painter, and we couldn't get free of the boat, and we were still attached to this boat as it being pulled around by it, and we needed to get away from it. But eventually we found a cutter and got away from tried to get away from the boat, only to be blown back under it by the wind. I think the Sudur Havid had shifted in the wind, and we were being pushed back underneath. And at one point we were trying to get clear of it, and the Sudur Havid actually came crashing down on us. I can remember the hull crushing us down, but then worse still, the big gantry at the back, the big stern gantry, came crushing down and actually pushed the raft underwater, like scooped it underwater, hit a couple of the guys on the head and crushed us down and scooped the raft full of water. And remember, this is water that's near freezing.
This episode is brought to you by Volvo Penta. With over a century of innovation under their belt, Volvo Penta understands what it means to provide people with the power that can take them as far or as deep as they want to go. With enhanced features like joystick driving and the fully integrated glass cockpit display, they help to provide you with solutions to navigate the path ahead. Trust in Volvo Penta to provide the reliability and performance you can count on. Visit volvopenta.com to learn more.
And then we popped free of the boat, and we were away, but we were in a life raft with, in total, there were 17 of us in that life raft. And then just a few moments later, the engines stopped, and that had been a constant sound, like a constant companion for months. But the engines stopped, and all we were left with was the sound of the storm around us. But then the Sudur Havid slipped under the waves. Now, I didn't see her sink. I think I'm quite glad I didn't. But she was gone, and we were left adrift in a life raft. There were 17 of us in our life raft, and then the other life raft, which had launched with the Portuguese deck bosses, Chilean and Carlos, also a third life raft as well. So there were 3 life rafts with people in it, and we could see the other life raft with the other crew in it nearby. But they'd escaped undamaged. And we were adrift in the middle of a storm in the sub-Antarctic, and the storm was still raging around us, so the noise, the wind and the waves crashing around in a little life raft with no light, and like I didn't know where the nearest boat was. Like the other fishing boats were, I hadn't seen one on radar for days, but I knew they weren't nearby. But our sister ship was 100 miles away. We were, I think, 120 odd miles from land, probably from the nearest, and from the nearest settlement, which only had little inflatable boats. We were hundreds of miles, and the Falkland Islands was probably 700 miles away. So we were middle of nowhere, adrift in a life raft. It was flooded. And so first thing I thought, right, we need to, we'll get the doors closed, we'll start trying to bail. And I think that we'd taken our boots off. Like somebody had told me that if we abandoned ship, that we needed to remove our boots because we were a longline, and there was a risk that hooks in our boots would get caught in the fabric and rip the life rafts. Now, I don't think that was true at all, but we'd all removed our boots, and so there were very few boots in the raft. So, like, we managed to get a couple of them, and they didn't work very well as bailers because they kept on folding underwater, and we couldn't find any sort of survival bags in the raft with proper bailers in them. But we did have, strangely, a gold, like a glass Nescafe jar, so a glass coffee jar, which I think one of the crew was using it for keeping his cigarettes dry. But either way, we were trying to bail this life raft with several tons of water in it using some Wellington boots and a coffee jar. And we bailed out over the side. But every time we bailed, either the raft would move around or we'd get another wave through the door, and we were just getting more water in. So we managed to seal one of the doors down, and we were trying to bail out through. But whatever we did, we couldn't make any difference in the amount of water in the raft. I know it was a lot of water in there, but I also wonder if we'd been damaged, below the waterline, that she was just leaking water. But we were up to our waists in this water. And after a while, we just gave up trying to bail and tried to get ourselves organised instead. And, some of the crew were just lying in the water. Some of them didn't even have life jackets on. I was in a deck suit, but some of the crew had abandoned in flip-flops and jogging pants, and, Bubbles was just wearing jogging pants and a knitted jumper.
And this water is not warming up in any,
No. And, so much water, and it was so cold that it wasn't long before your legs were really starting to feel it. So I'd done a little bit of scuba diving, and in that training, they'd taught us that, water will basically suck the heat out of you 25 times faster than air will. So even though it feels colder to be out in the air, you're better off being out of the water. So I managed to get myself with my leg over the rope that went around the edge of the life raft. So I managed to sort of straddle that so that my leg was astride it, holding me up out of the water. So, and then by getting myself into that position, I'd got most of my body out, and it wasn't long before my legs went numb. But at the same time, I was thinking, right, I'm out of the water, and this is my best chance. And that you could feel the water going in and out of the bottom of the suit, but I was making sort of small differences just to try and prolong my survival. So we managed to get the doors down, but every now and again the doors would be blown open. They had this ludicrous bit of Velcro to hold the doors down. So this is like the door of a tent that's on a life raft. So it's an inflatable life raft, and then this tent over the top, and the doors were held down by a bit of Velcro that had to be threaded through a little plastic hoop and then sealed down onto the Velcro on the tube. And that was really difficult. My hands were already like frozen from the water, and so trying to manipulate a little piece of Velcro it took ages, like working with chopsticks.
I bet you have some very choice notes for manufacturers of life rafts.
Yeah, I spoke to a life raft manufacturer afterwards, actually. Strangely, we were talking about this, and he said, "Oh, yeah, we don't do it that way anymore," which is a relief. It was just, it was good to hear that they have advanced the way they do it now. They're taking these lessons into account.
Yeah. Had he approached you for any reason, or how did you end up in conversation with this?
Yeah, we had, and for them, I'd been in touch with them, like just saying I'd come back from this, accident. It would be good to talk, and this company serviced the life rafts and made other equipment, and it was quite enlightening to talk to them to see how they could, how much better things could have been had our life rafts been had proper kit and not been damaged. And we managed to get the doors sealed, but now and again, the doors would go back. And at one point, it was still light, and we could see the other life raft, and we'd figured out that our life raft didn't have a light, and we were flooded. So there were myself and Butti, the fishing master, and Hannes, one of the crew, were basically looking out the door, looking at this other life raft and trying to work out whether we should swim. So the swells were enormous, but we could all swim, and we're all wearing life jackets, or we could grab them. And we're looking at it, and it's about 50 meters. So I don't know, 150 feet to the other life raft, and we're trying to work out well, sometimes it looked like less, and sometimes it looked like 50 meters, and we were trying to decide whether we would make it or not. And eventually we just said, "Oh no, it's not going to happen." So we went inside and sealed the door shut. I do not think we would have been able to swim that distance in those swells, and we would have soon lost our coordination and just we would have been lost. But we decided not to, so we retreated back inside to try and keep the heat in the raft. And basically not long after that, sort of darkness happened, sort of, we'd boarded the life rafts at 4 o'clock, and by 6 o'clock, I'm guessing it was pitch black, and there's nothing to do, but wait and try and.
How was morale at that point as it got dark? I can only imagine.
So at the start, when we boarded the raft, there had been even a few laughs. We'd been laughing about the fact that one of the guys' boots was so big, I was joking you could bail the Titanic with it. We'd been trying to keep each other's morale up, and people had been talking a little bit, not much, but just talking, asking questions. One of the guys had been shipwrecked years before, but off of Mauritius, where it was much warmer, and so they were asking him, and they were asking me when the boat was going to come, but I couldn't tell them that I didn't know that there was a boat anywhere nearby. And so morale at first had been, there'd been noise, at least there'd been conversation, but it was not long before people had sort of stopped making much noise. One guy at one point had been wailing, but I couldn't cope with it. It was just like sapping the energy out of me. So I yelled at him to just stop. And it basically fallen quiet. So by the time it was dark, it was pretty much silent within the raft. I mean, the noise of the storm around us, still the sound of the spray hitting the canopy, and the swells sort of threatening to tip us over and crashing, roaring through, and the wind. But within the raft, people had gone quiet. And then, occasionally I'd get a request, Matt, can you give me a hand, please? And I'd go across the raft to go and help them shut the doors again, get this piece of Velcro back through the plastic hoop. And then I'd go back to where I was straddling the rope. And, there was this little routine of trying to move in now and then. But pretty much everybody has settled into their own private fight for survival. I was trying to do things to improve my chances of survival, and that meant like doing my suit up, shifting on the rope, trying to shut down this. Like there was a flap in the canopy that kept on opening. I think you were supposed to put a radio antenna through it, but it kept on opening, and I was getting a cold draft in my face. So I kept on trying to shut that, and my fingers couldn't work the cord on it. And then I, fussing around doing different things, but just to try and keep myself busy and make myself survive. And I could feel the cold slow in me. My brain was not working, and I knew that my brain wasn't working as well as it might. But I was trying to hold on. But what? Hold on for what? How are you going to survive in a flooded life raft when? I didn't know what the time was. My watch was buried underneath layers of clothing, but I was feeling weaker. I didn't see how I could hold on until the morning. And how was anybody going to find us in an unlit life raft in the middle of the Southern Ocean? I remember at one point I looked down and there was his hand around the rope, but the hand was open and I couldn't bear the sadness of it. I figured that it was somebody who died, and there was just this hand like open around the rope. So I reached down and I closed the hand around the rope so it was holding on, because like my little hypothermia addled brain was just too moved by it. So I reached down and then the hand moved. Yeah. And I looked up along the line of the arm, and it was my friend Darnie, and he was looking at me like, why are you touching my hand? But he was still there. So he was still alive. So that was okay. Mm. The only light there was from the life jackets, because we had life jackets on with a little light next to your shoulder. So, it was the only illumination, really. Mm. So we'd been in this raft for some time. Hours had passed. I had no real way of knowing how long, but I knew I was sort of slowing down. And then one moment, one of the guys said, Matt, or somebody said, can I have a hand, please? Matt, can you give me a hand, please? And I thought, it's very polite, but I couldn't bring myself to move. And then I thought, oh no, come on. So I commando rolled across the raft one more time, like sort of crawled across the raft, got to the door and helped to seal this door down one more time. So my friend Mornay had been trying to hold the door shut with his hands, like just wedging his hands down to try and force them shut. And they were blown up one more time. So we were trying to get the door to hold down one more time. And then the wind ripped it up again. And I saw a light. And I thought, what's that? And then the swell moved and the light went. And I thought, no, I'm just seeing things. And then the next minute, the swell dropped again and there was a light there. And I was thinking, oh, there's a light. There's a light. There's a ship. And I didn't want us to miss this chance, but part of you is thinking you're hallucinating, but is it really a ship? But there's a light, and then there was a row of lights, and so I wanted to sort of scream out, so I was trying to scream to my friends in the life raft and trying to scream out to whoever it was in the boat that we were there, and I was trying to attract their attention. So I got the whistle out of my deck suit, so I snagged it. I couldn't work my thumb, so I managed to snag the piece of string it was on. I got this whistle in my mouth and started blowing as hard as I could, but then I'd probably blown too hard, it stopped working. So I was I got my light, and I was trying to wave it around, so I pulled the light off my life jacket and was waving it around, but then when I lifted it out of the water, it stopped working, so I had to put it back in the water. All these things, we were just trying to scream to get attention, and then we realised that they'd seen us. The spotlight fell on the raft, and we realised they'd seen us. So we pulled back inside this raft and pulled the covers down one last time, just to try and keep a little bit of heat left in it. And a few moments later, the raft was lit up, and we realised there was a boat alongside us. And we opened the doors to see this enormous fishing trawler sort of towering over us. And 1 minute we were being lifted up next to the crew at the rail. I can still remember seeing these shapes in oilskins next to the rail, and they were at the same place where we would have brought the fish aboard. And the next minute we were being dropped down so low we could see underneath. I could see the keel of the boat. Like, this is a big, 400-ton fishing boat. And I thought, oh, we're going to get crushed. But the next minute we lifted up. So they threw a rope to us, and it landed. landed on my hands, and I couldn't grasp it. So they pulled it, and it just fed through my hands. I couldn't grasp it. So they threw again, and the same thing happened. And then they threw again, and I managed to, I don't know, snag it with my thumbs or something. And they let go. So I was left holding this rope thinking, what am I supposed to do with this? And there was a rope ladder down the side of the boat. I knew I wouldn't be able to climb that. So it was ridiculous. So at a point, I just gave up, and I just held my hands up like a little baby wanting to be lifted up. And they grabbed hold of my sleeves. And I think they missed me once, but the next time they grabbed me, pulled, and the swell dropped away, and the life raft dropped away from under me, and I was left dangling over the Southern Ocean, yelling, pull, pull, pull. And they pulled me over the rail of the boat, put me on my feet, and I fell flat on my face on the deck.
Mm.
And
you were the first one to hit the deck.
Yeah, I was out of our raft. I was the first to be rescued because I'd been at the door, and I'd been at the door trying to get their attention. So when the rope was thrown and when the raft was finally brought alongside, then I was the first one, and I'd been so close to, I thought I was nearly dead. So when I put my hands up, and I thought, this is, last chance. So I put my hands up and got pulled off, and then they pulled off the boat. Then off of our raft, they managed to rescue 7 of us. So by the time they managed to recover some bodies as well, but by the end of it, we had 7 survivors out of 17. I think the skipper, Bubbles, had died within sight of the boat. I think he was doing at the very end.
Wow.
Right at the end. He'd been doing these roll calls where he was calling out people's names. And I thought, I'd sort of been thinking, hold on, this list is getting shorter. But that was right at the end. And then one of the guys later described that he'd been alive, and then when we were along next to the ship, he was gone, he was dead.
Wow.
So from the first life raft, there were 14 men had boarded it, and 14 men survived. So they'd managed to get away from the boat without getting flooded or damaged, and they'd been organised and been able to bail the water that had gone in. So they'd managed to all survive. So Charlie, the deck bosun in that raft, had done an amazing job in keeping people organised and trying to get EPIRBs up. They had a light that had been flashing, so their strobe was what had caught the attention of the boat. And then when they were being rescued, a little bit of the reflective tape on our life raft had caught one of the searchlights, and the crew had spotted it. So it wasn't my daft efforts of yelling and blowing a whistle and a light at all. It was just that one of their searchlights had caught a little bit of reflective tape. And 7 men out of the 17 in my life raft were rescued, were alive. And then, sadly, the third life raft was found upturned the next day, so capsized the next day, and nobody had survived in that raft, which was, such a sad shame. We've been holding out, hoping that there would be more survivors, and Shaquem and Carlos were lost as well.
Mm.
So in total, out of the 38, 21 of us survived, 17 died, including the skipper and the fishing master.
Right. And how long do you think you were in the raft in all?
So when I was pulled into onto the Isla Camilla, so the boat that rescued us was called the Isla Camilla. She was from Chile, from Punta Arenas. And when they lifted me off the deck and dragged me over their shoulders, like dragged me into the factory and stripped me of all my clothes and put me in a hot shower. And I can remember thinking, no, this isn't what you're supposed to do to a casualty with hypothermia. Right. I turned around and turned it hotter. And when they dragged me naked into the canteen and put me down on the bench to put clothes onto me, I can remember seeing the clock, and it was basically just before 8 o'clock at night, so 7:45. So we've been in the raft for almost 4 hours, and I know that does not sound like a long time, but I was so close to death.
Well, and that cold, it's such a different story. I mean, we have quite a few accounts of people who've been shipwrecked and adrift in a life raft, but almost all of them are in warm water conditions, and their conditions are just so much different. I mean, Steve Callahan lasted 76 days. His thoughts were not really immediate survival. They were sort of like, well, stay out of the sun and find some fish. It was very different from, I'm sure, from what you went through. Did you remember anyone being hungry? I mean, these things that, hunger and thirst, these things you associate with being adrift. I don't know if you had time to feel those sensations.
I did not. We were so busy in our life of just trying to cling on that it was not even an issue. We did find, when we found the grab bags that Bubbles and Butty had been getting ready on the bridge that I thought were going to contain, like, radio beacons and flares. In fact, we had a bottle of brandy, small bottle of brandy, some passports and a video camera. Nothing of any use. We did find some little sachets of water, but I wasn't thirsty. On the other raft, curiously, when everybody survived, because they're in a better state, one of the young guys, he was, 17 years old, so really young, Gideon, he was saying, I'm hungry. So they'd managed to find some, I think they managed to find some rations for him, which is just crazy. But he was in a much better state than me. And when I was pulled off, I pulled onto the Isla Camilla and rescued. I can remember just shivering. Like it took a while to start shivering. Yeah. But then it didn't stop for a long time. Like I was led on the bench, and they wrestled me into some clothes. But after a while, I can remember turning to my friend and saying, "Look, just give me a hug, man." And then the shivering, didn't stop for hours. So. Yeah, we were lucky. The shocking thing. So the Isla Camilla, this is all credit to the captain's, skill as a captain. Was they'd only just returned from refueling. They'd been in Chile, and they'd come back to the fishing grounds 2 days before. Mm. And so if we'd sunk any other time, they weren't there. They were when he heard our distress call to our sister ship. They took down the GPS coordinates, and they were 28 miles away. And they'd raced through the storm, the storm that sank us. They cut their lines and they raced to find us. And Ernesto Sandoval, the captain, had managed to predict, where we were going to be with tide and swell and wind. He'd worked out where we were going to be. And I think they arrived on scene, and within like 20 minutes or something had managed to find that first raft. Wow. After, 3 hours adrift in the middle of a storm, he managed to find it. One raft in the dark, one raft, one strobe on top, and that was it. And then because he found that, he found us. So the Isla Camilla that day, the crew and the officers basically risked their own lives to come and save us, and then to be able to find us so quickly, all credit to them.
Yeah. So, how long before you decided to sit down and write this book? You were approached, or how did it come to be?
No, I wasn't approached. It was funny because when it happened, my friend joked that it would make a good chapter in my autobiography one day, but we didn't think it would be like, I didn't think it was a big story. And I kind of tried to get on with my life again, went back to Aberdeen and like renovating his flat and things. And we did all these things just to get back to normal. And then years later, I was reading another book and it had been bothering me that nobody knew what had happened on the Sudur Havid. Like the story had happened and I'd heard that some of my crewmates, my fellow survivors, had died. And it was bothering me that they'd died and that nobody knew what had happened, how brave they'd been on the day. And so then I read this other book and I thought, I could do this. I could write the book. So I sat down, I think it was or 7 or 8 years after the boat that I started writing. But the good thing was that in the days after the sinking, I'd given a statement to the Falkland Islands police because we'd landed bodies in the Falkland Islands. After we were rescued, we were taken to South Georgia and then on to the Falkland Islands to get home. And because we landed bodies in the Falkland Islands, we'd had to have a coroner's inquest. And I'd given a very full statement to the police. So the crew had been told that the less they said to the police, the better, the sooner they would go home. And I said, is that true? And the police said, no, we'd like to know what happened. So I gave them an 80-page, 3.5-hour statement that basically then helped me when I was writing years later, because the police had been very nice and given me a copy of it. It helped me to then go put myself back there. I mean, I have got pretty good memories of it anyway, but it really helped me to catch the order of events and the speech and what everybody had said.
And now
so when
we're what, about 10 years after.
25 years since the boat sank, 10 years since the book was published. So
sorry, did writing it help you put things to bed, do you feel?
No. It was anything but cathartic. I think if any of your listeners are considering writing a book for therapy, it was like dragging steel wool over an old wound, but it did help me to get our story out. So not for me. Well, obviously it was important for me to tell the story, but the other crewmates, when I published the book, I was worried about what they would think because, I was writing it was my recollections and I was trying to be clear about that, but I didn't want them to come back and say, hey, hold on, that's not what happened. But actually the crew basically gave me the thumbs up and said, thank you for telling our story, because I did try to give as much detail and as much, honesty in it as I could and give the readers the best example, best image in their head of what it's like to be on a sinking ship. And that was important to me, but it didn't help put it to bed. When I spoke to Sven, who was in the other raft, and I was interviewing him to get a real idea of what it was like in the other life raft. And he said, oh, Matt, you can remember much more than me. I've forgotten all this. And because he'd put it to bed, he'd forgotten about it. He'd moved on with his life, and I was still living it every day, trying to write it down. And I think it was important to get it written down, but it didn't. Not recommended as therapy.
Are you still in touch with any of the crew?
Yeah, sadly, over the years we've lost a few more. It's obviously when you've been in a raft with somebody, to then hear that they've died is particularly sad. Knowing how hard they fought to survive. But over the years, we've lost a few more. But I'm still in touch with Monet and Sven, Big Darnie, and also Stephen. They now live in different countries around the world. We've got some of them are in Nebraska, New Zealand, Netherlands, and South Africa, amongst other places. But they've gone on to moved on with their lives onto other jobs and things. But yeah, still in touch with them, and it's good. There's a bit of a unique bond there.
You were on a veritable derelict, dare I say, slum ship then. But being, sort of, I don't want to say new to boating. You certainly had some boating experience, some measurable boating experience. What did you walk away from this incident thinking about boats in general?
When the Sudur Havid was built, she was a perfectly capable boat.
Mm.
And over the years, she'd been changed. And those changes hadn't been done properly, and they hadn't been accounted for. And I think importantly, they sort of changed her over the years. So she was no longer doing the job that she'd been built for. She was, carrying too much, carrying a lot of kit, but also, a lot of equipment, a lot of crew, a lot of fuel, a lot of fish. And she just wasn't able to stay up. That boat, when she'd been built, she'd fished off of Greenland for years. She'd fished in the Southern Ocean before. But on the day, when they did the court marine inquiry and the findings, it didn't sit easily with me at first because I didn't blame Bubbles and Butty in my head.
Mm-hmm.
But they found that for all of the problems with the boat is that Bubbles and Butty basically fished for too long in the conditions that we faced. They should have just stopped fishing and sorted out the problems with the pump and the boat, and then maybe we could have saved it. It'd be easy to say that I should have gone with a gut instinct and walked away from the boat when I saw her in the harbour. She was too old and rusty, but that wasn't what I thought. When I saw her, I thought, well, she's done it before, she can do it again.
Right.
And it's the decisions that were made on the day that really, could have been changed. And, if they'd mended the pumps properly, if they'd, accounted for the weight of the fuel properly, if they'd, all of the things like that, it could have been changed. But if they'd stopped fishing earlier, they cut the line, they could have saved the boat. Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. So in terms of my thoughts about fishing and boats, I think it was quite hard because when you walked up to the boat and you met Bubbles and Butty, they seemed like such capable guys. They'd been at sea, they had all the stories, but they'd grown complacent, and they hadn't thought that maybe it might actually happen to them. So when it did happen to them, they hadn't thought through what they were going to do about it, and they paid the price. They didn't survive, but they also caused the loss for a lot of other guys as well.
Do you think you'll ever buy a boat?
Yeah, but don't tell my wife. I haven't got the signed authority to buy one yet. I'm working on it.
I'm working on the same thing over here across the pond. Trust me. Well, Matthew Lewis, it has been a pleasure talking with you. Your book, Last Man Off, is riveting. It belongs on any ocean lover's bookshelf. Everyone should read your book. We'll put up a link. And please keep in touch.
Thank you very much, Owen. It's been a pleasure talking to you. So, thank you.
This episode was brought to you by Volvo Penta. Whether you're cruising calm waters or challenging heavy seas, trust Volvo Penta to provide safe, innovative, reliable marine solutions made to move you wherever your journey takes you. Visit volvopenta.com and explore their innovative marine and industrial products and services.
Without my love for the ocean, I would be long gone by now. It's some kind of devotion.